Shalom, shalom to everyone watching here through the Ways of Israel. We're going to continue what we started yesterday regarding looking at this period of time in which we recollect and remember the greatest disaster that happened upon our people, the Jewish nation, and how we lost a lot. It wasn't just merely losing the temple. It was not just merely that we were dispersed through the four corners of the world and persecuted and killed off because of the breaching of the temple that took place in result of the prophecy of Daniel regarding the abomination that caused desolation by the Roman power, by the gentile power that God brought upon the Jewish people as a result of our indifferences. In specific, our sages say that's because of Sinat Hinum, unwarranted hatred towards one another. But we don't realize that not only was the temple destroyed and the Jewish people decimated, but during and under the Hasmonean rulership that took up the positions of high priests, which by and large were mainly Sadducees, we also see that the seat of David was completely empty. What do I mean by that? It means that exactly what I just said. The seat of David was unoccupied. Many people, Alechem Shalom, Yeshua, and the seat of David was completely empty. This resulting from Sinat Hinum, which is also envy, hatred, despised because they wanted and they coveted the seat of power. And of course we know that the Sadducees, the inheritors of the Hasmonean rulership, would not allow anyone to sit on the seat of the throne of David. They had usurped that. Our sages tell us that because of this, that dynasty was completely obliterated, was completely removed and cut off, and had no longer any more descendants to further their lineages. So thus we don't find that descendant, even the Sadducees, anymore around. Perhaps in ideology, yes, but not as a people or a family that was known to have controlled the high seats of religious political government during the first century period. The reason for this 4 national fasts, as we read in the Araba Taaniyot, the Simon 549 of Yakut Yosef Taaniyot TishaB'Av, the historical basis for the national fast is based on the passage of the prophet Zechariah. And we find here something very fascinating on Zechariah chapter 8 verse 19, that this is what God had said: the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the 7th month, and the fast of the 10th month shall become days of joy and celebration for the household of Judah. Yet we now celebrate these days as days of fast and mourning. Interesting that this year many rabbis have declared the fast in a way completely exempt from fasting because of the coronavirus. Our sages explain in Ta'anit 26b that the fast of the 4th month refers to the 17th of Tammuz, since Tammuz is in the 4th month from Nisan. Our sages also say in Ta'anit 26b and taught 5 major catastrophes took place on this date over the generation. First, the set of the tablets of the law were smashed in response to the sin of the golden calf. 2, during the final siege of Jerusalem, in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the people became incapable of the daily Korban Tamid. And it's interesting, our sages point out in Ta'anit 26b that the verses states the passage in Jeremiah 52 verse 6 and 7 that the walls of Jerusalem was being breached on the 9th of Tammuz, and not as stated in the Mishnah. Rava answered that during the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, the wall was breached on the 9th of Tammuz, but during the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, the wall was breached on the 17th of Tammuz. In the Talmud Yerushalmi in Ta'anit 4:5, however, it's explained that they became confused in calculating the times. The Tosafot in Rosh Hashanah 18b explained that this means that during the turbulent times of the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, the people became confused and remembered the sequence of the events as if the walls had been breached on the 9th. although it actually took place on the 17th. The Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi disagree about the true date of the breaching of the walls during the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, and therefore the Rambam wrote in Yakut Taaniyot 5:2 that the walls of Jerusalem were breached on the 17th of Tammuz during the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, following the teachings of Talmud Bavli. The Ramban and likewise explained that we fast on the 17th only and not on the 9th, since our exiles today is in consequences of the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Interesting, we also read that during the final siege of Jerusalem in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the people became incapable of bringing their daily korban talmid, and we learn later on that the offerings ceased. The wall of Jerusalem, to be equal to the magnitude of the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, was destroyed, and it destroyed the grounds of the Beit HaMikdash, and surroundings were plowed over by Turnusufrus, the Roman governor of the land of Israel, fulfilling the prophecy of Jeremiah 26:18 and Micah 3:12 that Zion would be plowed over like a field. Now, I want to bring this to light because I think it's very important to understand that not only the temple was destroyed, but also the people were completely ravaged, as we read in the book of Lamentation, how Jeremiah cries out for the death and the carnage that took place as a result of the destruction of the temple. But not only they were affected. I want you to understand that whenever there was a destruction of the temple, also even prior to the destruction, the Mashiach potentials, because during the time of the Hasmonean kings, the Hasmoneans had usurped the throne of David, so therefore they did not allow anyone from the house of David to take over the seat and reestablish and restore the Davidic seat. Why is this so important? Because in the first century we read a very awful occurrence that took place in one of those potential Mashiachs. One Mashiach in particular that arose during that period of time, which became the founder of Christianity. And we read from both sources, both the Jewish sources as well as the Christian sources, how they basically made a plan to kill off the potential Mashiach of their time. He was not the only one. I want to make that very clear. Jesus or Yeshua was not the only one that were targets of assassination attempts by the Hasmonean leadership. He was not the only one. We read, even in history, many others who tried and attempted to take over and restore the dynasty, the monarchy, and were also removed from the ability to do that. Not only before Jesus, but even after Jesus. But it's interesting that there was documentations to such a degree, even though they may be slanted on both sides. I'm talking about from the Jewish sources. We read in the Talmud Sanhedrin how that they had to deal with Jesus or Yehoshua, what they call Yeshu, differently than among all the other ones that they tried to move away. And one of the telltale signs is in Tractate Talmud Sanhedrin, where it says that with him they had to deal with him differently because he was connected to Malchut. Malchut means kingship, means that he had a right to the throne, means that he was a rightful heir to the throne according to the house of David, which means that his lineage was of the house of David. We argue back and forth over the details that's represented it and was edited by Christian scribes in their Christian book, but nevertheless it's very clear, as I've indicated in some other studies in Spanish, that he was in fact of the descendant of Joseph, and that one of the descendants, Jeconiah, did not negate the fact that he could still rule as king in Israel. And as a matter of fact, in the gospel story, those very zealous pro-Israeli mindsets that wanted to impose the Jewish monarchy upon Israel at that time during the Roman occupation tried to do it, and he fled. He went to the desert. He said, not now, this is not the moment. But see, a lot of people don't understand that side of the history, because in Judaism they are prohibited from reading other literatures that may be considered heretical. I have read, studied, and even got a degree in that area of study, learning even the actual text, variant text of what is called the New Testament. Not only the one that was received and accepted and entered into the translations. Interesting enough, we read that this also happened not only to Jesus, but even to one of Rabbi Akiva's candidates, Bar Kochba. And I want to read you something very fascinating regarding this, because I want you to understand that Sinat Hinum killed off all potential messiahs and was the cause, let me say this very emphatically, was the cause of taking Jesus to be crucified by not the Jewish court, but by the power of Rome, because at this time the Jewish legal system did not have the authority nor the right to be able to put anyone to death. Complete death penalty cases had to be brought up as an issue of sedition of the state. It was considered a rebellion against the occupied power, which was Rome, and the peace agreement that they had made with Rome for 7 years. Interesting enough, this falls right into place when Jesus arises and people wanted to make him into the King Messiah. I'm going to put aside the issues that perhaps the Jewish community have regarding him. He didn't keep Torah, he didn't do this and he did that. Those things can be argued on a textual basis, that in fact he did keep Torah, that in fact he was a popular preacher, that in fact there was a group of following of Jewish people wanting to make him Messiah. My position, he could have been, he should have been, he would have been, but just like many others in our history, didn't make it, so did he. He did not make it. Nevertheless, we have to include him as part of those who basically almost caused the kingdom of Israel to be restored. He even went to the leadership, and we find that in the Gospel of John, chapter 10. And what did he do there? They asked him, if you are the Messiah, tell us already. And he said, didn't I show you the works? Didn't I show you the proof that I made? And they got angry, and they basically said, you know what? You are a threat. And so they began to come together as a group to be able to knock him off and turn him over to the Roman power. And this, we have the whole story of how that took place in Matthew chapter 27, where basically he is now in the hands of Pontius Pilate, and sarcastically he says, you know, what have you done? These people have turned you over. We have a custom to let go a Jew on the feast of Passover, before the feast of Passover. We have Bar Kuziba, who was a radical nationalist Israeli, and we have Yeshua, Jesus, who was a radical proponent to be the Messiah of Israel. So which one do you want us to let go? And it's interesting enough, it says in the passage of Matthew that the leadership, the Sadducees, the Hasmonean leadership, was encouraging the crowd that had gathered to cry out and tell them, we want Bar Kuziba, we don't want Jesus, have him crucified. Why was that? Because of the envy and the power control of the religious political leadership that was in power at that time. And what happened is obviously, according to the Christian story, a historical account in which he was led to be nailed, crucified. But lo and behold, there was an activity from among the Perusians to make sure he was saved. And that's a whole different story I'm not going to get into, how that interesting melodrama takes place from both the Jewish side as well as the Christian side, and how they really harmonize. They don't contradict each other. But in fact, it was a plot to kill Jesus, because he represented to become the king of Israel of the first century, the potential Messiah. But he was not the only one killed. We have proof that this group of people also killed off even Bar Kochba. Why? And it says very clearly in our passage that they convened together to plot to kill Bar Kochba. He ruled for 2 years in Jerusalem, if you did not know that. And yet, because he could not whip the people's spirit, they said, this guy's not the Mashiach. He's not qualified. And they knocked him off. The political, religious, liberal Jews had him knocked off. And I'm saying this because of why. Why am I bringing this to account when we have so much anti-Semitism in this country? Because we need to realize that most of the anti-Semitism is as a result of these type of Jews who basically are liberal, assimilated Jews, like were the Hasmoneans, that basically lost it. And we read, I'm going to read this because it's very interesting. If I don't get to finish right now, I definitely will finish this. It says, based on the Targum Yerushalayim, let me see here. A couple of things happen here. Here we go. Rambam in Hilkot Taaniyot 5.3 and Hilkot Menachem 11.3 wrote that Bar Kochba was killed by the non-Jews. Talmud Yerushalmi and the Midrash Eka Rabati explains that after he killed the aged Rebbe Eliezer HaMoadi, it was decreed in heaven that he also be killed. Interesting, it was decreed in heaven also, if you read the story about Jesus, that he too would be killed. His head was later presented to the Emperor Hadrian. In the Talmud Sanhedrin, however, the account is that Bar Kochba, alias Bar Kuziba, alias Bar Kochba, ruled for 2.5 years and then proclaimed himself to be Mashiach. The sages, who are the sages? We were talking about the same sages that were present at the trial of Jesus. Same people. The sages countered his claim, demonstrating that the prophets described the Mashiach as being capable of judging between two litigants by merely smelling which party was on the side of halakhah. Interesting enough, Jesus did that. He was able to distinguish between one another and be able even to read what the other had on mind. We have a lot of examples of that, and yet they still killed him too. Since Bar Kuziba lacked the ability and still persisted in claiming to be Mashiach, the sages assassinated him. Let me repeat that again. The sages assassinated him. Rabbeinu Meir Halevi and Abu La'afiyah explained that by making such a claim, Bar Kuziba was guilty of being a false prophet and therefore incurred the death penalty. But they could not put him to death. They didn't have the power to do so. They did the same thing to Bar Kochba that they did with Yehoshua HaNotri. The greatest power of Sinat Hinum was demonstrated by this group of religious politicians that destroyed, not only was the cause of the destruction of the temple, but not only that, was the very cause of prohibiting the descendant of David to rise on the seat and throne of David. And until we rectify this in Jewish leadership, that we stop with the Sinat Hinum and stop with destroying potential Mashiachs in our generations, like we had done recently, then can we be reversed and have and be granted the true Emet Mashiach and the true temple from Shemayim. Based on this passage, Rabbeinu Avraham ben David commented that Rambam is incorrect and asserting that he was killed by the non-Jews. See Chazon Ovadia on this footnote on page 3. Rabbi Yosef cited Rabbeinu Yeruham, that Gedaliah ben Acham was killed on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, but in fact on the fast of Rosh Hashanah, and likewise the opinion of Rabbeinu Menachem HaEmeri in Hibur HaTeshuvah. And we also have in Zechariah chapter 8 verse 18. And we have so much sources to show the position of the leadership, both from the Hasmonean descendants as well as the sages of that time, put to death to make sure that no one would be on the throne of David, because they had the power, the political power, to be able to negotiate with Rome. And it was decreed that Rome would destroy the temple. It was also decreed by divine decree that all of these potential Mashiachs would not be able to take upon the throne. Why would that happen? That happened because Hashem decreed it, and it was considered a divine punishment upon the children of Israel. Until this day we lament and we cry because we have no temple and we have no king, and the fact that God brings about a decree of punishment onto the Jewish people because of our hatred and envy one for another is an indication that he still loves us, that he cares for us, that he has not abandoned the children of Israel, even when we are chastised. As it says in the prophet, God whom he loves, he chastises and corrects. All of these things that are coming upon the Jewish people, all of the sorrows, all of the pains, is a very clear expression of God's divine love for us to create tikkun in our lives, create reparation for the damages that we have done. Could you imagine for one moment that we can be able to say to all of the descendants of David, whom our leadership destroyed and killed by convening plots to kill them because they were coming from a liberal leftist viewpoint, and say, Mechila, Mechila. One of the incredible leaders of our generation was able to say something that most Jewish leadership would never say, because of the pain and agony that this one Jew in history caused upon all of Israel. We're talking about recognizing this Jew in history. Of course, we had Rabbi Jacob Emden, who basically a 16th century Talmudist, who said in fact that this Jew, Yeshua HaNotri, was the greatest blessing that was brought upon the world and provided a double blessing upon the world. There were also many other potential Mashiachs that came in a rise in history that was also blessings upon the world, including the most recent one, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And yet, he had his enemies. And he had enemies who wished and prayed for his demise and his death. Yes, my friends. Competing Hasidic dynasties wishing he would just disappear, that he would be removed from the face of the earth. I know that because I spoke to a lot of the other Hasidic dynasties and wishing to pray that because he thought he was Mashiach, according to some of their opinions, he should be removed. And as we know, he passed away with a massive heart attack, unexpected to the whole entire Hasidic Lubavitcher community. But what he taught has brought a lot of light to a lot of people. And for this reason, we should recognize the great endeavors and the great rewards that he bestowed upon the Jewish world after the Holocaust. He was a light, a big light in our generation that brought a lot of Jews back to observance. But yet, the envy, Sinat Hinum of other groups against him, was one of the big things he had to carry. And no doubt was probably one of the reasons and causes for his demise as well. So when we talk about Sinat Hinum, we have to talk about the whole gambit of what it does and how it does it. It does it by destroying not only the temple, which is of bricks and stones and wood and stone. It destroys the Jewish people, their character, their reputation. It destroys Jewish leadership by removing them from their rightful heir to the throne of David. I want Mashiach, and I know he's going to be a ascending monarchy taking place in Israel. You say, well, Moshe, you're crazy because all of the previous monarchies have been nothing but disasters. But this is going to be different. Why? Because this one will rule and follow God's command and follows God's Torah, and his thing is about doing what is right, not doing what you think is right. This is Rabbi Moshe Otero. May we ask Mechila to all of the descendants of David who attempted to reestablish the throne of David, and ask one another forgiveness for the unwarranted hatred that is thrown upon us for no reason, because of envy, because of jealousness, because of power. May we see Mashiach in our time. At least that's my prayer, and hope it's yours too as well. Shalom, shalom.